Hello, good evening, everybody. Is that a sufficiently stentorian voice to get? Hi, sorry to interrupt everybody from their dinner. My name is Ray Burghardt. I'm the president of the Pacific Century Institute, and it is really wonderful to be here together, everybody, seeing all these faces, not even wearing masks at this moment. It's great. So, yeah, and drinking. They're drinking, including Tom, and especially Tom Plate is drinking now. So, but yeah, right. So, our distinguished vice president. Yes, yeah. So, great to have it. You know, there's a little bit of a cloud hanging over the world at these days, but we're here tonight to support an organization that does some good things in the world, and an organization whose motto is building bridges, which is kind of the opposite of that cloud hanging over the world. So maybe it's a very appropriate time to be having this dinner. And here we are after a year of absence from having this banquet. We're doing it in person again, and we're here at a new venue here at the famous, iconic Beverly Hills Hotel, with splendid place. Isn't that great? I don't know about you, but did you see some of the Rat Pack people who were actually walking around outside? You know, I think I saw Sammy Davis Jr. out there. I think, so, yeah. Yeah. I had one just before I saw Marilyn. Yes, that was intoxicating. Yes, right. So we have an excellent program here tonight. And the first thing that we always do for these dinners is that we ask in our Project Bridge youth ambassadors to come in and lead us all in the Pledge of Allegiance. And they bring in the presentation of the flag. And for those of you who might, you know, this might be your first time at this dinner or first event with PCI, the Youth Ambassador Program is a wonderful program, which was one of the earliest things that the organization did, way back in 1993. Right after the LA riots, the idea came that we should have a program that enabled young people at the high school age, starting from kids from both New York and from LA, to go to learn about Korea, have sort of several weeks of training about Korea, and then to go and actually visit Korea. And it's continued now for 30 years. So I am going to give the high sign for the youth ambassadors. This is our 2022 contingent of students. Of course, unfortunately, there was none last year, and they're hoping to go in July. So please welcome them.
Please rise for the Pledge of Allegiance. Okay. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Okay, all right. Well, Ambassador Burghardt tells me that you can't eat dinner until I get up here, so here I am. We've all forgotten how to do this. Annyeonghaseyo, ni hao. It's good evening. My name is Kathleen Stevens. I have not been in California for over 2 years. I've never been to the Beverly Hills Hotel. This is fabulous. I really am just really so pleased to be here tonight in my capacity as the chair of the PCI board. And I want to say on behalf of the entire board that we welcome in a very, very special way all of you here gathered for this dinner, which has always been an annual dinner, but we've missed some time, and so I'm so happy we're able to gather back here tonight. It's a time to renew friendship and cooperation that binds a very, I think, closely knit community. So great to see people I have not seen for a couple of years, but we're also very far-flung. And I want to extend a special welcome, if I may, to a few people, including some elected leaders. One thing I've noticed in this time we've been in of political turmoil, but I think it's a very encouraging sign, is the greater representation of many communities, including the Korean and other Asian American communities in our local politics. And I'm saying this without sure if they're still here with us tonight, but California State Senator David Min, is he still with us here? Can I say a special welcome to you? Thank you. Thank you for your public service. Thank you. And the City of Buena Park Mayor Sunny Pak. I didn't see her earlier, but I know she, are you here? She's running late. As a good politician, that's good. She's working for her community. But you know, it is a very special thing and says something about, I think, an encouraging sign about, in many ways, the challenging times we're in. And again, not to stress too much the challenges, but despite the many constraints of the past 2 years, I'm really happy to see that PCI's work has continued. Most importantly, in many ways, as we saw with the young people who just did our flag ceremony, our Project Bridge program has continued, and we have participants from the previous year here tonight, as well as the current group. Even when they were not able to meet in person or travel as in past years, they've worked together to find new ways to build the bridges of connection and understanding that are at the heart of this experience. And I think, as we all know, again, from the difficult experiences and reflections of the last couple of years, this kind of connection is more important than ever. This is not something that we kind of fixed, right? But we need to continually renew and rediscover. So a PCI initiative, Project Bridge, started almost 30 years ago in the aftermath of the 1992 LA riots, is work that is more relevant and needed than ever before, and it must continue. And we met with some of the Project Bridge group, the current ones and some of the past ones as well, just before this dinner and before our reception. And one thing that really struck me is, I mean, there's a focus, let's say, on Korea in this, but there was also a focus on, you know, the notion that whatever you're doing, you need to understand something about people's history, people's language, people's culture. And with that, you can go into, as our Project Bridge alumni have, into international affairs, into public service, into business, into whatever it is you're going to do, with a greater awareness of how to continue to kind of build the kind of connections we need to have to solve our global problems and issues, or indeed to solve the problems within our own communities. Because I think what we've also seen over the past couple of years is that within our own communities, there is much, much work to be done. And in that context, I also want to welcome another special guest tonight, and that is someone who's been doing work within our communities in the United States for a long, long time. And that is Grace Kim, if she'll stand up for a moment, who met with our Project Bridge students earlier. Mrs. Kim, Grace Kim, I probably won't mind my saying that she's now over 90 years of age. I need to find out what her regime is. And has an extraordinary life, but just to say, I mean, it includes being a very early activist in California and in the US, a co-founder of the Chol Lee Defense Committee way back decades ago, defending a Korean immigrant wrongfully committed of a murder. Continuing up to the present day in her retirement community, organizing a solidarity rally when residents were bullied and threatened with anti-Asian sentiment. This is an inspiration to us all, and a reminder to us all that the work is ongoing. It's a journey, it's not a destination, and we are in it together with our Project Bridge on the one hand, and with Grace and others of you on the other hand who have committed to this kind of activism, whether it's domestically in our own communities or internationally over the years. And it's in that context that I'm really, really pleased that tonight, and I won't belabor this, one, because we're going to have dinner, but two, after dinner, you're going to meet and hear in person from our Building Bridges awardees tonight. Every year, even when we are virtual, we recognize extraordinary sustained dedication to building ties across the Pacific, and tonight a little bit across the Atlantic as well, I guess. And in that context, it's a great pleasure to welcome the Honorable Glenn Ford, former member of the European Parliament. His decades-long work in Europe and Asia on issues ranging from trade and technology to engagement with North Korea. I don't count things by number of visits alone, but he just told me, Glenn, where are you? Glenn, sorry, right there, that he's been in North Korea over 50 times. I don't know what the frequent flyer program is on Air Cordio, but I hope you're getting some kind of benefits there. But no, I mean, quite seriously, this kind of persistence is essential, as we've discovered, and it epitomizes the spirit of the Building Bridges Award. And I think we've also thought, for other reasons over the last couple of days, why, even though this is the Pacific Century Institute, Atlantic ties are also still very important. You know, what happens anywhere in the world impacts Asia, it impacts California, it impacts the United States, and we really do have to put our efforts together to address all of this. And I am equally thrilled that we are recognizing Loyola Marymount University with the Institutional Building Bridges Award. We are so honored that LMU President Timothy Law Snyder and his wife Carol Costello are joining us tonight to accept the award. I personally have had the opportunity over the years to meet many Loyola Marymount students and alumni, and I've seen firsthand the kind of leadership that LMU is nurturing for the Pacific Century, both here in Southern California and far, far beyond. Finally, I want to say, and I know he may not like this, but I want to say a word about Spencer Kim, whose vision and intellect created PCI. I can't find Spencer either. And whose generosity sustains it. I think tonight is a night for a special word of gratitude and admiration. Spencer, as you all know, eschews public recognition, as did his extraordinary wife, Mia, who along with Spencer has been the heart and soul of PCI since its inception. And tonight I would ask that you, with me, remember and miss Mia tonight and always. Her example will continue to inspire all of us who are lucky enough to know her. May this evening and our continued efforts to realize the vision of a peaceful, hopeful Pacific Century honor her life and memory. Thank you.
Thank you, Kathy. Those very wise words and very appropriate. I would like to also take this moment to acknowledge and to thank all of those who made this dinner possible. And in the current environment, the COVID continuing, putting on an event like this, I know, not only from PCI experience, but other organizations, is even more difficult than ever. So I'd like to thank, in addition to reiterating Kathy's thanks to our founder, Spencer Kim, I'd like to also thank Angie Pak. Angie, where are you? Is she being shy again? All right. It's very difficult to get these people to accept our gratitude. You know, thank Angie and all of the there are many people here who were volunteers and helped to make this dinner happen. Are there any volunteers who will dare to stand up and receive our thanks? Any of you, please stand up. All right, you're not standing up, but we're going to thank you anyway. Thank you. Thank you. One of the features of these dinners is always to have a musical interlude. It is time for that. And we are having this evening the Trio Celeste. And they are going to play two numbers. They're going to play Mendelssohn's Piano Trio number 1 in D major. The movement Andante con molto tranquillo. And then we're going to have Beethoven's Piano Trio in B flat major, opus 11, Allegro con brio. So, please join me in welcoming them.
Thank you, ladies and gentlemen. I understand you don't have to have a mask if you're drinking. I'm drinking. I'm a journalist. I'm always drinking. I work, by the way, with Spencer Kim and Timothy Law Snyder, so that tells you something about me. It's tough, let me tell you, it's tough. I'm a vice president of Pacific Century Institute, which doesn't mean too much, but it's a nice title. And I am a member of the faculty of LMU, the university, which is being honored tonight, which makes me very, very happy because I think it's deserved. I wanted to introduce our president and the institution. Well, he'll introduce you to the institution with authority, with a story that may not seem related, but I think I can relate it. And it's a little different way of doing an introduction. Because one way introducing the president of LMU is say, here's the president of LMU, and what else is there to say? But I have another thought. Years ago, the United Nations Secretary General, the Honorable Ban Ki-moon, visited Loyola Marymount University at the invitation of the LMU president, Timothy Law Snyder, the next speaker. The former South Korean foreign minister offered a major speech which was introduced by someone, don't remember who, with the thought that the man in that singular job of head of the United Nations walks amid history. Walks amid history. Then a certain step, every step he takes, and someday there'll be a she, I hope, Kathleen be a good choice, but you know, that every step he takes is in the middle of some problem. And as you think of what's happening today, you realize that history often surprises us and is not easy, it's difficult. But then again, besides the job of trying to maintain world peace, we admit that's a very hard job, but so is the job of the emergency room professional in the rage of a pandemic, or the soldier defending his or her country against outside military aggression. And so is the job of maintaining the high standards and transcendent mission of a university, which arguably is one of civilization's great achievements. Now, here on the West Coast, there's no paucity of universities, but great ones are rarities anywhere. Our historically Jesuit university, Loyola Marymount University, LMU, is one of them. These universities are not easy to manage. They are hard work. The president has a very talented team working with him, including our provost. He could not do this alone. Still, there was only one president, and in this case, his name is Timothy Law Snyder. He earned his Ph.D. in applied and computational mathematics, and I have no idea what that means, from Princeton University. And he is here to talk to you about the university of which he is proud to be president. And like any proud and committed educator in these troubled times of turmoil and transition, he walks amid history. Dr. Snyder.
Good evening. Is it not nice to be together in person? How does that feel? Whew. Thank you, my dear friend, my hair idol, and actually the glasses are pretty cool, Professor Tom Plate. I thank you, dinner chairperson Peter Kim, and dinner coordinator and Pacific Century Institute co-founder Spencer Kim. PCI President, Ambassador Raymond Burghardt. PCI Executive Director Angie Palk. PCI Chair, Ambassador Kathleen Stevens. And Vice Chair James Thompson. Thank you, Pacific Century Institute, for recognizing LMU with the Building Bridges Award alongside the amazing Glenn Ford. We are honored to be in such esteemed company. As an academic, typically when I begin a speech, I will start with something like, over the next 40 minutes, I am going to, and that usually gets a chuckle, but tonight, if we wait about, maybe if Glenn and I go about 200 minutes, you can leave your masks at the table and navigate the lobby without that equipment. And that'd be an unusual moment for us, I think. It's certainly going to feel good as soon as you know, when midnight strikes, the county is changing its rules. So bravo to the county for getting hip to the real sentiment of we the people. Loyola Marymount's Catholic, Jesuit, and Marymount heritage motivates us to engage the world. We cultivate students, and we do that with students of all faith traditions, all cultures, all origins. And our mission compels us to tear down barriers to intellectual exploration, barriers to our creativity, and barriers to ethical human progress. This is the essence of what the Institute calls bridge building. We are proud of the work that we have done throughout our history as we seek, as we say at LMU, to create the world we want to live in. Creating this world demands that we drive international learning, promoting the global perspectives that will prepare our students for what we all know is an increasingly interconnected society, and we seek to bring them toward a well-educated solidarity. And I think our young ambassadors very much represent a spirit of solidarity and the spirit of a brighter future. They don't pay attention to the news of the moment. They pay attention to cultural phenomena that will bring each of us to a better place. So please allow me to take you on a brisk tour of what we call our global imagination. And I'm going to give some props to my LMU colleagues who are leading our efforts. I'll begin with PCI Vice President and LMU's Distinguished Scholar of Asian and Asian American Studies, and that would be Tom Plate, and the work that he and his students are doing with Asia Media International to enhance LA's relationship. Tom, please stand. Enhancing our relationship with Asia. Thank you, Tom. Our Center for Asian Business, led by Professor Young-Sun Peck, promotes understanding about Asian countries and people through courses, grants, scholarships, and lectures. Professor Peck is also at the helm of our Center for International Business Education, providing transformative global learning experiences. Professor Peck, could you please rise? Thank you. Our Global Policy Institute, headed by Professor Gene Park, is LA's premier interdisciplinary think tank that enlists rigorous academic research to solve global policy challenges. I don't think Professor Park is with us, is that correct? Okay, we'll move on then, but we still love him. The work we do through our Office of Global and Local Initiatives with Vice Provost Roberta Espinoza facilitates collaborations among our faculty, our staff, our students, our alumni, international institutions, and the idea here is to incorporate global and local learning experiences into each of our teaching, scholarship, and service. Dr. Espinoza, you're here. Please rise, and thank you. Why is diversity important? Diversity is important because when diverse groups of people get together, they can solve bigger problems better than can more homogeneous people. Our LMU mission calls upon us to advance our DEI and anti-racist efforts, demanding equity for all of God's creations. So with our new Vice President for Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion, Emelyn de la Pena, building bridges within our community and beyond continues to be a top priority. Dr. de la Pena, could you please rise? Thank you. All the way from Stanford, where it's freezing. And speaking of diversity, LA's diversity infuses all that we do. LA is the gateway to the Pacific Rim. Some even say it is a piece of the Pacific Rim. It is the hub of global creativity and innovation. And our internationalization efforts indeed effloresce from LA and are cultivated by external relations. And these are led by Associate Vice President Mariana Villa. Mariana, could you please rise? And thank you. Could all associated with LMU please rise so we can give you a round of applause and thanks. These are the people who do all the important work of LMU, and we so much appreciate you being with us. As we say, go Lions! Go Lions, that's right. So what I've shared is only a taste of LMU's bridge building. I didn't even mention how earlier today, 6 of our students engaged in an international dialogue with Pope Francis, personally, one-on-one, or that earlier this week we hosted 5 mayoral candidates for their first debate of the year, or that one of my fondest LMU memories was dining with Secretary General of the UN, Ban Ki-moon, the night we recognized him with LMU's highest honor, and that was a doctorate. I could go on, but I'm really here just to thank each of you, thank the PCI, and to affirm LMU's commitment to being worthy of and exemplifying this prestigious award. Your work, that of the individuals in this room, honorable, thoughtful, experienced, luminous, is critical to creating this world we want to live in. LMU is proud to be in concert with the Pacific Century Institute, and that means with each of you, to build on the impactful work of Project Bridge and to pursue our shared, our common goal of creating a better world for those here, for those to come, and for the earth itself. We appreciate and thank you for this beautiful honor. Thank you kindly.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Tim Snyder, for those very, very encouraging remarks, inspiring remarks. It's my honor now to introduce our personal awardee. We have an organizational awardee, which was LMU this year, and then personal awardee is Mr. Glenn Ford, Director of Track 2 Asia, former member of the European Parliament. And I was impressed to learn this. We actually had sort of perhaps interchanged before, or overlapped in the same organization before, because Glenn reminded me this evening that he had spent several months back in 2008, was it? 2008, at the East-West Center, an organization where I've also was once employed and still do a lot, including collaborations with PCI. And it was during his time there as a POSCO fellow that he wrote his first book about North Korea. Mr. Ford, Glenn has he spent 25 years as a member of the European Parliament and was very active in trade issues there and the trade committees, and took a particular interest in Asia. And that interest in Asia, as someone else mentioned already this evening, took the form of an extraordinary focus on North Korea. And do you have the award of the most number of trips to North Korea that anyone's ever made? You may. Apparently it's almost... He's always very careful to say almost 50 trips, you know. So, that's a lot. I've been there once, so that's a lot. So, but he really has become widely recognized throughout the world as an expert on the North Korean issue and on Northeast Asian issues in general, and has now the author of 2 books about North Korea. We'll look to make sure I read them here. The one that he was writing when we were both at the East-West Center was North Korea on the Brink, Pluto Press, 2008, and then he has now published 10 years later, Talking to North Korea in 2018. Is that the one that's for sale outside? So we now look forward to hearing his wise remarks.
I think you might be getting a slideshow. I don't know whether it's going to happen. Yes, fine. It seemed to me that actually showing you North Korea might help a little. It's a collection of pictures I've taken over the last 10 years. They'll just flash through, but that's part of my vision of North Korea. Let me say I'm very honored to be here at this Building Bridges events, and I'd like to echo the congratulations for the event and the thanks to the Pacific Century Institute and all its staff and all of the senior people here that are with us today. In a sense, we're talking about the world we want to live in. North Korea is the world we don't want to live in, but there are lessons to be learnt from it. I think it's important for, and I was going to say this to the young ambassadors, to be uncomfortable every day. I think it's a learning process. But it's an enormous honor and privilege to be invited by the Pacific Century Institute and Spencer Kim to join the ranks of those eminent scholars, politicians, philanthropists who've been given this award over the last 20 years. People have talked about the establishment of the PCI in Louisville 40 years ago, and it's now firmly lodged in California as one of the preeminent institutes of its time. But as I said, before I get into my remarks, there you have slides of factories, fun fairs, dolphinariums, orphanages, hospitals, shops, the mass games, election day. There's actually an election day in North Korea. But there were no challenges to the result that I recall. There are pictures of Pyongyang, Kaesong, Rasong, the Maastricht ski resort, if you want to go skiing. And there's a picture that's sort of crept in there from Senegal. The African Renaissance monument there, which emulates in a way the Statue of Liberty, was actually built by the North Koreans for the president of Senegal and was opened by the North Korean head of state. You'll see at one point that the NBA shirts are available in Rasong because that's where they actually make them, or were making them a few years ago. So the NBA shirts are actually a North Korean original rather than intruding from elsewhere. I was a Labour member of the European Parliament for 25 years. I first got involved with North Korea in 1997. At the time, the European Union had no diplomatic relations with North Korea. European Commission officials were not allowed to talk to North Koreans. I'd done a little bit of work on North Korea about EU-North Korea trade. And so I had a group come to my office in the European Parliament saying, we're suffering from a famine. Can we take your beef? Because at the time we were destroying hundreds of thousands of cattle because of CJD. And I said, well, that might be a bit tricky. We're going to have to work on this. But I think I probably need to see what the situation is on the ground before I can go and see the European Commission and put pressure on to provide food aid. So 3 of us, on an unofficial delegation, 3 members of the European Parliament, went to North Korea, and it was grim. The lights weren't working. We went to orphanages, children's centres, where I'm not a doctor, but it was very clear to me that there were some very hungry children. The figures vary. Some people say 1 million people died. Some people say 3 million people died. But that arduous march, as it's put in North Korea, was a terrible event. And the European Union, the United States, and the world eventually rallied round. Part of the problem was the North Koreans didn't want to admit they have a problem till it was almost too late. That led to a situation. I said to the North Koreans, would you like an official delegation? And they said, yes. And I said, but you don't care how I get it, do you? They said, no. So I went back, and even then, North Korea was nobody's sort of flavor of the month. We went back and actually tabled a resolution saying that the situation in North Korea was very bad and demanding that an official European Parliament delegation be allowed to go. And I think probably 95% of the people voting for that thought that's never going to happen. But they're all rather surprised when the North Korean response was send a delegation. So that was my second trip. I'm not going to go through the one by one, but we had 3 ad hoc trips organised by the Foreign Affairs Committee of the European Parliament. Then I proposed we establish a standing delegation with the Korean Peninsula. And so even today, there is a European Parliament standing delegation to North and South Korea. And it actually met last week, and I was speaking to it on Zoom, but we haven't actually been to North Korea very recently. I was then invited in a whole variety of different ways on behalf of the socialist group, the Friedrich Neumann Foundation, and the rest. But after I lost my seat in 2009, I was asked by the International Department of the party. We were in an unusual position, because most people in a dialogue with North Korea are either talking to the Institute for Disarmament and Peace, which is an adjunct of the Foreign Ministry, or the Institute for American Studies, which is another adjunct of the Foreign Ministry. But we were dealing with the party. And in communist countries or cult countries, it's the party that actually make the decisions and not the ministries. And so we were dealing with the party. And so I was asked if I could set up a political dialogue with North Korea, with senior American politicians. Well, the answer is very simple. You've got to be joking. I mean, no senior European politician is going to want to have a dialogue with North Korea. So I said, what I could do is probably get a collection of former senior politicians together. And so we set up, the principal figure, apart from myself, was Jonathan Powell, who was Tony Blair's chef de cabinet from when he became leader of the Labour Party to when he stood down. And we've been having this political dialogue with the international department of the party since 2010. We've been travelling, not in the last 2 years, but we've been travelling 3 or 4 times a year to meet with the head of the international department of the party. Originally, it was Kim Jong-il, an uncle of Kim Jong-il, then Kang Suk-ju, then Chae Tae-bok, Ri So-young, who was the last one we were dealing with, who was a member of the executive of the Politburo and was one of the 4 people in the room with the summits with President Xi, President Moon, and President Trump. What I want to conclude by saying, and it's not going to be that short, don't get excited, is to talk about what I've learned, in a sense. The myths and legends of North Korea, in terms of how people generally see them. Possibly many of you here have a different view. You're more knowledgeable and more engaged. But they're not irrational. They're nasty and authoritarian, but they're not irrational. They're not isolated. They're not unwilling to talk. They're not a developing country. They're not interested in unification. And there's no bilateral deal with the United States. They're not irrational because they see two systemic threats to their future, or at least the future of the leadership. There's the external threat from the United States, South Korea, and Japan, and there's the internal threat if the people who matter, people who live in Pyongyang, don't get rising living standards and the rest. The development of the nuclear deterrent is a sign of weakness, not strength. They've lost the conventional arms race with the South. South Korea now spends more on its military budget than the North Korean GDP. And if you add in Japan and the United States, North Korea is outspent by a factor of 50. It also helps with 2 shortages they have. One is manpower. It literally is manpower because the men are in the military, and energy. The nuclear deterrent allows them to decant 100,000 people out of the military into the factories where there are shortages. And it allows them potentially to create a civil nuclear program. They're not isolated. They probably are. They're probably more isolated now than they've been for a long time, but people refer to North Korea as the hermit kingdom. They didn't like talking to the West very much, but they were very active in the non-aligned movement. They were very active with the small communisms of places like Vietnam and Cuba. They sent to Africa troops, trainers, and the mass games. There were mass games like the North Koreans, and there are some pictures there of the mass games, everywhere from Guyana to Burkina Faso via Madagascar. So they were very active out there. We're told they're unwilling to talk. They're unwilling to talk at the moment to Americans. And after that 3.5-day trip back from Hanoi, I guess you might understand why. They've approached the EU twice recently to talk. They've asked to reopen the dialogue on human rights, only because they want to make their case, of course. And they've asked more recently to reopen the political dialogue at Director General level in the European Commission and with the Director General for Europe in the Ministry of Foreign Affairs. The European Union said no. Maybe it's the right thing to do. All I'm saying, don't let's imagine it's true that the North Koreans aren't prepared to talk to anybody. Developing country. Often I talk to people in Europe who think North Korea is a developing country. It's not a developing country, it's an industrial state. It's a failed industrial state. That's its problem. There's no pool of peasant labor waiting induction into the factories, which is why you have the manpower problem. They have an old-fashioned model of the economy. They think that you can have thousands of people in factories making things, and that's the way of the future. It just might be right for North Korea, in the sense that there are enormous pools of cheap labor around the world. But what you've got in North Korea that's unique is cheap, skilled labor. And there's actually a prospect to use that cheap, skilled labor in the factories. They're interested in economic modernization, they prefer, rather than reform. There's a story going around at the moment that Kim Jong-un is cutting back. I don't think that's true. He is cutting back in a certain sector. Most of the economic activity is under the umbrella of the ministries, the party, or the military. So the International Department of the Party's European section has 2 pizzerias and an Italian clothes shop. That's fine. It's a public-private partnership between those people and their institutions. What the North Koreans, what Kim Jong-un doesn't like, is not these samurai under their masters, but what I call the Ronin capitalists. The people who've opened market stalls and have made a lot of money. The ones that are out engaging in conspicuous consumption. The ones that are out not wearing their Kim Il-sung badges. They're the ones that they're cutting back on. North Korea is moving very rapidly, in my view, towards a kind of capitalist economy. But it's not an American-style economy. It's a Japanese style with the zaibatsu, South Korean with the chaebol, Chinese with the state-owned enterprises. It's that kind of, if you want, market Leninism that you've got. They're absolutely not interested in early unification. Early unification means assimilation. And the senior people in North Korea know that the South Korean economy is 50 times bigger. They're not looking at the German model. They want a very different model of unification. They say we're Asian tigers like everybody else. If America lifts its hostile policy, then we can grow our economy at 10, 12, 15% a year for 20 years. Then we'll be back in the same league with South Korea, and then we can talk unification. Which is why, as I say, the most likely outcome, at least in the foreseeable future, is 2 countries, 1 system. Are they prepared to get rid of their nuclear weapons? I think they were. In the 2018 New Year's address, everyone got very excited because apart from saying we've got a nuclear deterrent and we're going into mass production of nuclear weapons and missiles, they said we'll turn up at the Pyeongchang Olympics. And the result of that was to open the whole process up, of course. The 2019 New Year's address, which most people missed, talked about the end of the production of nuclear weapons, removal of first use of nuclear weapons, an end of sales of missiles, and turning tanks into tractors. They were ready to start the process of engaging, founded at the start on a bilateral deal with Washington. Now that fell apart that all fell at the Hanoi hurdle, and that's been the problem. Since then, I mean, the new administration, the Biden administration, has promised to speak anytime, anywhere, except it's insisted on using different language from time to time, which the North Koreans rather liked the Singapore Declaration with its promise of, if you want, denuclearizing the peninsula. Because for them, that was code for we can have a civil nuclear program. Because South Korea is not going to give up its civil nuclear program, so denuclearization doesn't mean giving up your civil nuclear program, because North Korea's got an energy shortage and doesn't want to depend on anybody else. The Biden administration has been kind of alternative using denuclearizing North Korea, denuclearizing the peninsula, that's created problems. But the last point I want to make is that any final deal with North Korea will be a multilateral one, which is why the European Union might be interesting. And for that matter, South Korea, Japan, China, and maybe even Russia. The 2 things North Korea needs are security guarantees. And the point they've made is it will not be a letter signed by the current US president, because they had that with Bill Clinton with the agreed framework, and we saw what happened to that. What they're looking for is something like the Iran deal, the Joint Comprehensive Plan of Action, a Security Council Plus guarantee. They rather liked the reaction when President Trump tried to tear up the Iran deal, because unlike the agreed framework when President Bush did the same thing, when President Bush did it, it was over. With the Iran deal, not only the Russians and the Chinese, the usual suspects, but the European Union, the United Kingdom, France and Germany said, hang on, it's working. We shouldn't be tearing it up. The North Koreans rather liked that. So you're likely to see, if there is a solution, something like the JPCOA, guaranteed by the Security Council Plus. The pluses will be different. It will be South Korea and probably Japan. But at the same time, the North Koreans are also looking, like they looked for in the agreed framework, a compensation for giving up their nuclear weapons. I mean, back with the agreed framework, they were just on the verge of starting the process. Now they've actually got 40 or 50 of them. So they're looking roughly for 15 to 20 billion US dollars, just working it up from the 4.5 billion that was promised with the agreed framework. Now, no US president is going to be willing to pay that to North Korea, and no US president is going to be able to pay that to North Korea because Congress won't let him or her do it. So the only solution is to actually get a collection of donors. South Korea is going to be the head of the list. We know that. Last time round with the agreed framework, it was Japan number 2 and the European Union number 3. So you're going to need not only a multilateral collection of guarantors, but a multilateral collection of donors. That's where we are now. That's where we've got to get to. It's going to be a long, hard road. Nothing worth doing is easy. And if at first you don't succeed, try diplomacy. But I know it's people like you here that are going to actually enable that to happen in the future. And organizations like the Pacific Century Institute and Spencer Kim who are going to be the enablers and are going to build those bridges. Thank you.
All right, let's,
Okay,
yeah.
all right, all right.
They are instructed.
Okay, all right, so Glenn Ford, great pleasure to present this to you. Sorry,
That's the right one for Loyola, yes.
and really terrific speech, thank you. Thank you. You're terrific.
Beautiful.
And I'm not sure what's
You
in
get the
there.
box,
It may
too.
be wine.
One of the great things about the PCI annual dinners, when health conditions permit, is that they end on time. They end on time. They always have, and I've always been impressed, because from the East Coast, sometimes the sun would rise, and the last speaker would be ending his or her concluding remarks. So we're going to do it tonight, and I'm going to be very, very brief. But before I do, I just want to take the opportunity to shout out to Provost Tom Poon over there, who's a very important person at LMU. The second, I don't want to embarrass it, but we would be nowhere at LMU without great students who then graduate and do great things. And Michelle Nguyen, who was my student at LMU, if you'd stand up, please. She works in the office of progressive Congresswoman Katie Porter. And if you know Katie Porter, she's really something. And we have one of our best students now in the office, handling media and other stuff. And we're very proud of her. I also want to shout out to Ray Burghardt, who does a great job every year as the president of PCI and also the master of ceremonies. Ray. And finally, to the chair of my own department, Professor Edward Park, who's chairman of the Asian American Studies department at LMU, which is a very avant-garde and important program. Ed, could you stand up just for a second and say hi to everybody? One reason I ended with Ed is because Ed reminds me that my students are always asking questions, some of which can not be answered. And of course, one of the things that I usually do when I can't answer a question is make believe I know the answer, and then tell some Chinese epigram or some story that I make up, right there. Like, when the sky is blue but the ground is not, bad things happen. And then they say, is that, there's two Chinese guys in the back, and they go, is that one of our sayings? And the other guy says, I don't know, we got so many, it could be, But this one comes from a great man, a professor, named Robert Scalapino at Berkeley. And I tell this at the end of every session, and I'll keep doing it until you listen and get it right. But I love this story, and it's kind of what I often will say to my students if they'll give me more than 5 seconds, of concentrated time, when they ask, will North and South Korea ever be reunited? And Scalapino, when he was asked this question, used to tell this story. It's a very short story, but I love the story. And the story begins with St. Peter. He's at the gates of heaven. And God comes out to see him and says, Peter, you got a moment? And, Peter says, yeah, I got a moment for you, God. I have a moment for you, God. Listen, I want to talk to you. I've had so many committee meetings and so many bureaucratic things up here in heaven, and everything's so perfect, and the angels are clean, and the clouds, and so forth. But I feel I'm just too much distance between me and the real souls on earth. And really, I feel I'm losing touch with what we're about. That's our business, Maybe what you should do is, like, every day bring up the person who died and is coming to join us in heaven, who had the most beautiful, clean soul, and reward that person. Say, God wants to meet you, and have a little chat with you. And you can ask God anything you want. So Peter, he thinks God's, maybe, losing it, but he's God. So what can you do? And you say, yes, sire. And and he goes down and he inquires, and he comes back to God, and he says, God, well, yeah, I have someone. There's a problem, though. He says, what's that? It's a tie. The most beautiful soul on earth is a tie. And you won't believe this. There's the one woman, old lady, from South Korea, and the other from North Korea. And God says, well, what's the problem? I've got an immense amount of time here. Bring them both up. And they can each ask a question. So Peter says, okay, God, that's what you want. Yes, sir. So he brings the two ladies up, and they are awestruck. They are in the presence of what they've given their life for. And there is God. And God looks at them and says, ask me any question you want, and I will answer it. Because I'm God. I know everything. I can see into the eternity. So the two little ladies, they go over and they confer, and they come back, and one of them says, well, God, actually, we have the same question. Just the one question. God says, all right, ask me. The question is, when will North and South Korea be reunited? God says, oh, God, that's a tough one. Best I can tell you is not in my lifetime.